Hello everyone, this is Velveteen and we're back with another episode of Nikke Lore. Before we start, I want to remind everyone that there will be spoilers up to chapter 30. That's right, with the recent CP changes, I have finished the campaign. And that's why this episode took so long. Although, nothing in the later chapters really affect anything said here, but let's get started. Today's episode is, what is the NIMPH? And what is corruption? It's going to be two topics today. We'll go into everything related to the NIMPH, including corruption and Vaphaus. Both of these are shown right as the game begins, so we're immediately subjected to it. However, even to the current end of the story, we know very little about how either of these work. So the first question is, what does NIMPH even stand for? Well, NIMPH stands for Neuro-Implanted Machine for the Protection of Humans. Alright, that's a lot of words, but what does it do exactly and what does it mean by protection of humans? Short answer, the NIMPH is basically used to prevent Nikkes from harming humans. Long answer, its main use is to affect the memory. It's in charge of three things: erase, remember, and write. Every single Nikke, also the ones created by Cecil Eden, are all created using NIMPH, and has NIMPH inside their brains. I already explained the Nickification process in another episode, so I won't go into too much detail. Basically, to summarize the process, NIMPH is injected into a still living human. The NIMPH will erase their old memory and write a new set of memories, as well as commands where they must protect humanity. And then it will remember this memory as their default. This new memory is basically the blank state of the Nikke, so whenever a memory wipe is issued, they are reset to that point. Think a factory reset on your phone. Now that sounds cruel, but there are upsides to the NIMPH. NIMPH is used to suppress emotions and trauma for Nikke. For example, Laplace was completely frozen in fear, which rendered her unable to fight. This happened because she had her NIMPH removed. We'll get back to how on that later. NIMPH also helps the brain process traumatic experiences, like when a niece and Neon were cut in half and died. The NIMPH gave Neon a whole new memory of that entire event where they weren't cut down. There are even cases where a Nikke is unable to live, experiencing certain events and wish to have their memory wiped. Of course, memory wipes are most commonly used to prevent or cure a mind switch, which is when a Nikke receives too much cognitive dissonance about her not being alive anymore and the brain isn't able to handle it. Then they will go crazy and kill anything in sight. In the game, NIMPH is seen as a good thing by the ARC. We as players are biased towards it being bad because we view the game through the eyes of the commander, who sees it as a form of slavery or oppression. When Matisse Squad had their NIMPH removed, there were protests asking for them to get it back because of how dangerous it is. Nikkes are weapons that can cause a lot of harm if they decide to ever turn on humanity. But I think there is something we need to talk about, because this doesn't make sense. The thing preventing Nikkes from harming humans are the inhibitors from the NIMPH. From what we can see, Perilous Siege, who do not have inhibitors, are able to kill humans. And even with the NIMPH, a commander can issue a command to turn off a Nikke's inhibitor. So, what is stopping ARC terrorists from, say, getting a commander to issue a command to disable the inhibitors and cause massive damage? Even without disabling inhibitors, we see this with Heavenly Ascension, where they send mass-produced Nikkes to suicide bomb an event. Sure, NIMPH prevents the direct harm of humans and doesn't prevent collateral damage. But surely setting off a bomb in the middle of the crowd counts as direct harm. So the story is fairly inconsistent with how the nymph is presented. Did someone turn it off? It's never said that they did. Yet somehow they can harm humans. They have attempted to explain it in-game with some lore. Crow, for example, through her own sheer willpower, was able to override the nymph and shoot a human through careful ricochet of a bullet, and also acts of extreme terrorism that put humans in harm's way. But these are mass-produced Nikkes, and their combat abilities were stripped and sold to the Outer Rim as slave labor. Well, Cecil, for example, gives us a better unbiased opinion about the nymph. Previously, the nymph was explained through the lens of the central government, so you can't really believe what we hear, right? Cecil goes into a pretty detailed explanation, but the first important point is that nymph wasn't created by humans. This could mean two things, really. As I said in a previous episode, I speculated that nymph was a rapture technology, so they may have stolen it off some defeated rapture. Another is probably was lost technology during the events of the first rapture invasion. Remember that humanity was losing until the first Nikkes were created and they started having a fighting chance, but still eventually lost, but whatever. Whoever created nymph was probably not around anymore. That's why no one really understands the full extent of what the nymph does. And if raptures were man-made, it could have the same person who made boasty things. Another important detail is the nymph is inconsistent. What it does sloppily. And humans have no idea the full extent of what the nymph is capable of, or what its real intent even is. Does this explain how some Nikkes in Heavenly Ascension were able to harm humans? Probably not, because mass-produced Nikkes don't really have strong personalities on their own, and they use a standard mass-produced personality. And lastly, almost every single Nikke is still using the nymph. If it is truly rapture technology, wouldn't that make all Nikkes possible sleeper agents if they were able to, target it in some way? And actually it is. It's possible. We know this as corruption. Now, corruption is its own bag of inconsistency. It's never really explained what it does, and the effects of corruption also varies each time it's shown. So it's kind of like nymph in a way, and probably for a reason. Corruption is rapture technology that specifically targets Nikke's nymph. Why? We don't know, but I have some crazy theories that I'll get into later. Let's talk about corruption a little bit before we go off the deep end. What we do know is that only a few specific raptures are able to corrupt a Nikke, usually through the form of a tentacle. These include Ultra, which is the first rapture that evolved the ability to corrupt the nymph. This is an old, outdated model of rapture during the start of the Rapture War. Blacksmith and Harvester also has tentacles that corrupt, and it causes the Nikke to lure themselves and others towards it so it can be captured. Then, the last rapture that we know for sure is Chatterbox. He corrupted Maldernia with his detached head by shining a bright light on her. That doesn't even make sense. Also, he has a needle in his hand that can corrupt a Nikke with a single prick, as shown in the recent For the King event. Now, Chatterbox is a wild card because he's an irregular rapture. We still have no idea what exactly he is. And the effects of corruption varies. Corruption is a ever-evolving weapon, and the earliest form of corruption near the start of the Rapture War took some time before it affected the Nikke. and it causes Nikke to become enraged and attack with reckless abandon. The more modern form of corruption now allows Nikke's more free will, but it still gives them the command to lure Nikke's to be captured. As seen in Marion, she is able to remain herself until she reached the point where the corruption took over. The same also happened to the NIMPH, where they remain relatively normal until reaching a certain location. Then there are the weirder effects of corruption. Why? I don't know. Red Hood was able to stave off her corruption the entire time through sheer willpower. Later on, she even woken up 30 years later after going to a deep sleep, probably under effects of the corruption. And when she woke up, corruption has not taken over her. She was still of a relatively sane mind. Then we have the Bond story with Skeleton, where Nikke inside the Ark was corrupted. This one is a complete canon-breaking event, it feels, because what happens here either completely breaks the lore of the Nikke, that or something else insidious is happening inside the Ark. More than that in a bit. This special brand of corruption changes the words of human and rapture around, so Nikke sees human as the enemy and must protect raptures. This is a very advanced form of corruption never seen again in the game. Chatterbox also explains in detail what corruption actually does. He claims that corruption causes Nikkes to answer to raptures, that they are entirely conscious but unable to control their body or talk as it acts on its own. Now, if this is true or not, we don't know, because we only have 2 cases of recovering from corruption. Marion, which went through a mind wipe and lost her entire memory, so she's of no help. And Mati, who, through the use of Vaphaus, destroyed the NIMPH, but never mentioned anything of that sort. Well, more on Vaphaus later. This is all assuming we can trust Chatterbox and he wasn't just bluffing, because in the end he never went through with the corruption. This also differs because he had a needle in his hand instead of the bright light shining on Modernia. So I don't know what's going on with Chatterbox. Chatterbox is the exception, not the rule. You cannot take anything related to Chatterbox as fact for other raptures because he's a complete wild card. Alright, backtrack a little bit. Let's go back to the Nikke with corruption inside the Ark. Now, it's been explained in the very first chapter that the Ark is protected by the Aegis barrier, which is something that screens everything coming in or out for corruption, and it's said that these barriers are impenetrable, which means the event where Nikke comes back while corruption was dormant doesn't make sense, because corruption is instantaneous and would have been picked up by the Aegis barrier. However, if we look at it this way, if it isn't a canon-breaking event, but foreshadowing something else instead. Now, remember when I said corruption was a weapon used by raptors to target Nikke specifically? It wasn't actually true. Humans have known about corruption, they have been studying corruption, and they have been using corruption. The very first chapter we learned that Marion's corruption was from inside the Ark. She was infected by human hands and then snuck outside the barrier just so she would meet the commander specifically by shooting down his aircraft. Does this mean this Nikke with corruption wasn't infected by raptors while on the surface? Was she from a corruption research lab and they were testing out new ways to corrupt Nikkes by changing the wordings? And the reason she was corrupted was just a fake cover story? Since we haven't seen corruption this specific in the story again, and seeing how the art treats their Nikkes, I think this is a very plausible theory. As for the reason why corruption even exists is another mystery in itself. Yes, corruption is used to lure Nikkes in, but there is also a secondary reason. We learned from our talks with Nihilister that all heretics, and even the Queen, started off as corrupted Nikkes. We learned that the Ark corrupts a lot of Nikkes and sends it to the Raptures as a deal with Chatterbox. The Raptures are collecting a lot of corrupted Nikkes for some reason. Alright, now tinfoil hats on, it's speculation time. I believe that corruption exists as a means to create more heretics. That Raptures were man-made creation and the person who made a NIMPH was responsible for the creation of both Raptures and Nikkes. And the end result, the heretics, was the original plan of the creation, but something happened and Raptures went rogue. We have evidence in that Raptures and Nikkes fused together almost too perfectly, as if it was meant to be. That heretics have the strength of both Raptures and Nikkes and elevated to a whole new level. Not to mention NIMPH is used by both Nikkes and heretics. Well, we don't know how Raptures create the heretics or how they revive the Nikkes like Marion. Raptures didn't destroy humanity because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. They wanted to create heretics. And that is my crazy theory. And don't worry, there'll be one more before the video ends. Now, there's one more thing related to the NIMPH corruption that we need to talk about, and that is Vapos. What is Vapos? It's a special type of blood that can break down the nanomachines inside the NIMPH. Why? How? We don't know. It's never really explained yet, and it's a complete mystery, but we do have a little bit of idea what it is. We know that Vapos bullets were first created during the first Rapture invasion, which is around the time of the Goddess Squad. We know this because the Pilgrims all know about the Vapos, and it was created from their commander's blood. The process is a mystery in itself how it was created, and we don't know how widely it was used. However, we do know that Vapos was used to kill a heretic as evidenced by Snow White, which led the player down the path of looking for Vapos in the first place, to save Marion. Stopping corruption was a side effect and was actually only a theory until it was used on Matisse. Because the truth was, Modernia was never shot with the Vapos. We missed. She caught the bullet. Since a heretic was made with mostly nanomachines, Vapos can destroy them instantly. We see this with Vapos on Nihilister. Even a low quality broken down Vapos bullet was able to inflict so much damage to her that it crippled her. However, there is something special about Vapos blood though, because even the Raptures are looking for it. Chatterbox seems to know a lot about the Vapos, even as far as asking the commander if we ever had any memories of being sick as a child. The commander actually has no memories of his past, although he does remember a hospital. This could be an easy narrative tool. This allows the commander to learn about the world alongside the player. Or it could mean that there's something mysterious about the commander's past. We just plain don't know it at this point of the story. But I've always been speculating that Raptures are man-made. So what is stopping the commander from being a clone or a test subject or even man-made? Cecil mentions that there has to be someone higher up in the government protecting our blood type from becoming public. Someone that's probably higher than Anderson, because Marion was someone related to the commander's past. She was corrupted and sent to us on purpose so we can meet. This feels like something above Anderson, because he seems confused about the whole thing. Another possibility is Enoch, the Ark's AI, who shows a strange interest in the commander. The fact that Chatterbox asked about our time in the hospital, and Hillister wanting to open us up, speculates that commander is probably an experiment, or maybe the commander isn't even fully human. Perhaps we don't even know what we truly are. If people have a hard time telling humans and Nikke apart in the Ark, what's to say we are so sure that we are truly fully human? NIMPH, corruption, Vapals, all very important in the story, and we know absolutely nothing about it. We'll most likely get more information as we progress through the main story as the new chapters start coming in. But for now, this is all the information we have. What do you think about my crazy theory? Do you have a crazy theory about what a NIMPH is? Or why the Raptors are looking for Vapals in the commander? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, give it a like. If you don't, give it a dislike. And thank you very much for watching.